Welcome to the American Reformer Podcast, hosted by Josh Abbotoy and Timon, Cline. Our mission is to promote a vigorous Christian approach to the cultural challenges of our day, rooted in the rich tradition of Protestant social and political thought.
All right, welcome back, everyone, to the American Reformer Podcast. Usual host here, Timon Cline, Editor-in-Chief of American Reformer, and I'm joined in the studio today by a repeat guest. I don't know if it's the most recurring appearances, Auron, but it's getting close. This is several times now, which means you're very brave, and we appreciate you coming, Auron MacIntyre, coming back on to talk to us about issues on the right, issues in our political understanding, which is what I think last time we had you on, we were talking about. Back then it was the USAID issue. This time we have a couple things we want to cover, Auron, and thanks again for coming on. The first thing we wanted to touch on is sort of our opening here is you were recently, at time of recording, on Tim Pool, which is a big, for those that don't know, a huge audience, a big show. And you were there ostensibly to debate Joel Berry. It turned into, maybe more of a group activity, which is totally fine. But I think what I wanted to ask you about is what you took away from that. Not that you learned it there, but took away insofar as like evangelicals misunderstanding politics, misunderstanding power, and therefore poorly formulating their goals or their solutions to, our current ills in our country.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And it was a very odd experience. If you've ever been on Tim's show before, you have to kind of fight to get a word in edgewise, and I'm used to that. But I expected in what was in theory a one-on-one debate to have a little more direct interaction with my interlocutor. Tim had taken some umbrage with the behavior of Joel Berry, but more specifically also Joel's friend and co-belligerent James Lindsay. Don't want to go deep into all of the Twitter drama, but unfortunately that is a large amount of kind of what happened. I was hoping that Joel and I would get to a more substantive disagreement about kind of our root philosophical and strategic differences. And every time I kind of tried to pull it back onto that issue, Tim kind of went back to pointing out kind of the issues with the way that James and Joel have conducted themselves. Inside of that, there were interesting moments, so I don't want to say that it was not unproductive. And I think to some extent, Tim was justified in the way that he was angered by the conduct of both men. But I think the couple things that we saw, and I'm sure we'll drill down deeper on these issues. But the couple big issues that I saw that Joel kept running into is that, one, he did not have a definition of victory or a plan for achieving it. He was very sure that other people had the wrong plan. But then when you asked him for his alternative, there just wasn't anything there. And it was clear that he had not thought through what he was actually fighting for and what he would achieve. He just kind of said, well, I'm pro-liberty. I'm a constitutional conservative. But then when you asked him, okay, but what actual objectives does that create? How do we achieve any of those goals? He just kind of went, well, however you want to do it, not that way, which was very revealing. The other issue was that Joel obviously had not thought about the way that his coalition was formed. He was very sure that the side that Tim and I were on was the wrong one. And he was very angry about certain people and certain behaviors on that side. And fair enough, there are certainly bad actors, I think, on both sides. But he had not thought that there were both bad actors on both sides. And he seemed somewhat blown away that Tim would be pointing out that the behavior of himself and James Lindsay had more or less equaled all the bad behaviors he believed existed for people like Nick Fuentes. which is not to justify any of those bad behaviors, but it was certainly a situation where he had not thought about the way that his behavior and his coalitional strategy honestly reflected the very thing he was claiming to oppose. So I think, while again, I wish we could have gotten away from the Twitter drama and more towards the kind of bedrock disagreements there. There was some truth revealed about kind of the nature of that coalition and the nature of that pursuit of politics or lack thereof that really left him vulnerable, I think, in that moment.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit more about those briefly in order. So the first point, which I don't know Joel, I've never spoken to him, but just from seeing some of his Twitter activity seems to check out, which is his vision, insofar as he has one, are kind of these floating, values of, like, as you said, liberty. I'm pro-liberty. I'm pro-constitution. I mean, was there any? Did he exhibit any ability to sort of define what those mean, what he's talking about?
No, and that was particularly concerning because, he, for instance, his first assertion was that he was constitutionally conservative, and so anyone who was constitutionally conservative could kind of be on his team. And so when I asked, and he said, we can return to these things, and I said, okay, but what version of the Constitution do you want to return to? Because obviously we have Articles of Confederation, we have the 1790 Constitution, we have the post Civil War Constitution, we have FDR, we have the Civil Rights Act. Each one of these are kind of like a mini revolution inside the form. So we still technically have the form of the Constitution, but we're in each case kind of just ignoring everything that came before. The 10th Amendment kind of goes into the trash, and corporation doctrine kind of just blows up the idea of federalism. And so, I asked him, specifically, which one of these would you return to? Because I've got a feeling you don't want to return to, like, the Immigration Act of 1790, which restricted immigration to white European men of good character. So where do you want to go back to? What is this sweet spot? Because at some level, Joel believes we have progressed. He is fundamentally progressive in the sense that the Constitution, the country as written, was not actually sufficient and had to progress to some ideal that kind of culminates in all these different ideologies coming together and reaching their fulfillment. But when you ask him when that is, like, when did that take place? Where do you want to nail that down? He admitted that he just didn't know, and that the Constitution had changed many times, but he just didn't have an answer. Likewise, when it came to the idea that ultimately we could, it was the constitutional conservative and liberty. With the same thing, he said, well, James Lindsay and Dave Rubin, despite having very deep disagreements with my Christian faith, they're pro-liberty, so I can work with them. It's like, okay, well, in the case of Dave Rubin's liberty, you mean the liberty to literally purchase children from their mothers. You mean the liberty to engage in human trafficking. Mm-hmm. A libertarian, when they say pursuit of liberty, means, the ability to do heroin. And so is that what you're pushing for? And he said, no. It's like, okay, so what are we pushing for when we say liberty? And he just didn't have an answer.
And he clearly had no, and the reason we're talking about Joel Berry, it this way is I do think he's representative of many people that hold his, not just his ideological positions, but his positions within, in their reaction to the new right, I would say. His general disposition is shared by many. So that's why he's useful as sort of analog. But so presumably no, discussion from him of what a sort of classical understanding of liberty would be, which would necessarily outlaw that kind of licentiousness that you were pointed out, which means they're actually not for liberty unless you're adopting this libertarian approach, but it's certainly not this kind of classical Republican liberty. In that discussion of the Constitution was just so strange. As presumably he just is talking about words that are on the paper. He's not talking about a constitution, any sort of broader and deeper understanding of the actual way of life of the people and that being preserved. He just likes the Schoolhouse Rock, words on the paper. And and admits that maybe they've been corrupted, but what we need to do is just tweak it slightly backward to remove the excesses. But generally, we're on a good trajectory.
So this is weird, and this is what I wish I would have had more time to really nail him down on and drill down on, because I would be fascinated if he can come up with an answer. But yeah, when in the debate, I explained the more classical understanding of what a constitution was, which that was kind of the clip that came out for me on that particular debate. But for him, he's like, okay, well, no, that's all postmodern nonsense. It's just what's on the paper. But at the same time, he doesn't believe it's just what's on the paper, because as he agreed with, he would not want to go back to the Constitution as written in the 1790s.
Right.
Like
so something else is animating it. Yeah.
Precisely. So he wants to go back to the Constitution, but not the words on the paper. He wants to go back to a nondescript moment where he feels like the words on the paper were finally properly lived out and understood. And so again, it's a fundamentally progressive understanding of constitutions where it isn't actually just the words on paper. So he kind of wants simultaneously to claim some version of like originalism with the Constitution, but he doesn't want to be too originalist. There's some kind of unspecified moment at which the Constitution kind of just created this perfect order, and we want to go back to whatever that was. Not the founders, not what's actually on the paper, but whatever kind of nondescript moment in which the Constitution achieved its true promise.
Yeah, so he would be. I mean, there's a lot of friends that are like this that I appreciate, but it's basically, without knowing it, he probably is like many quote unquote conservatives who are actually, they like a lot of the language, the aspirational, very progressive language coming out of Lincoln and the reinterpretation of the constitutional order, ostensibly tied to the Declaration, and this is how we get the perfect formula later. Not acknowledging along the way that you had to completely reform in a certain way the actual constitutional order and change the way of life of the people to do that. But they like the way that feels and sounds with this sort of Lincolnian flair with it. Again, it's very, it's not very specific, but there seems to be, they like that kind of corrective, of an expansion of the constitutional order at that point or something. It's very sentimental.
It is, and I don't even think that they would be okay with returning to the Constitution as understood post-Lincoln. I don't think they would be fine with getting rid of the Civil Rights Act, right? So right. I think that really what Joel Berry wants is the same thing James Lindsay wants. He wants the Constitution from the 1990s.
Yeah.
When he goes back to, he wants Bill Clinton America. That's kind of the Constitution he believes in. Mm-hmm. But this is my problem when we frame, well, I want to go back to the founding. I believe in the words on the paper. No, you don't. Not even close. You would think that if we lived by the words on the paper, you would call this a fascist Christian, theocracy or something. And if we actually went with what the founders believed, you would say it's all racist and it's all evil. It's all Nazism. And so and when you tell me someone like, James Lindsay is a classical liberal, an atheist who's polyamorous and these, it's like, no, he's not. Like, he doesn't believe in classical liberalism in the slightest. John Locke would throw him down a well. Yeah. Like, so the idea that, any of this is returning to the founding or, we're calling on the true spirit of the American Constitution and classical liberalism. No, it's not. And that's my problem. These guys are trying to speak with authority from a tradition that they have fundamentally rejected.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. And not only this, I mean, they love this, what I always sort of gather from people. They love this, a lot of the language, and it sounds nice about this high degree of liberality you had in the late 18th century, early 19th century. It sounds really good, especially if you don't look into too many specifics, but they're unwilling to attend to the necessities of managing personnel, basically, to be able to have that. Both, to construct the virtuous citizenry and the homogenous citizenry that you need to be able to have that. So they want, the cake and to eat it too. is basically what, what's required to manage this sort of disperse and multicultural empire is not the same form of government you have for a small homogenous republic on the eastern seaboard in the late 18th century. It's just not the same thing. But they're insisting on making it the same thing.
Exactly. And this is what I kept trying to explain. The problem, the reason, so what happens, I think, with a lot of guys in Joel Berry's position is they genuinely want to maintain American tradition as they understand it. Mm-hmm. The problem is they don't know anything about the American tradition.
Yeah.
They just don't know. They haven't they haven't read Federalist Papers. They haven't, looked at the actual history around the formation, the real beliefs that people had and what they were living like in those times. What they have is this like kind of, again, the Schoolhouse Rock or really the kind of the Rush Limbaugh version of the American tradition.
I totally agree with this for the most part. I think, they want to be good Americans, patriotic. They want to love the founding. It's just that they have not really devoted the time to understanding what that is. They take this sort of comic book version that's fed to them, and I think fed to them for obvious reasons, and they run with that. So they're trying to be good defenders of the American tradition, and they just don't know what it is.
Yes, and so I think this is why, very interestingly, I noticed this parallel too, which is interesting. I don't know if you remember this, but when Jordan Peterson started coming on the scene, he was speaking with a lot of the new atheists and kind of the intellectual dark web sphere, right?
Yeah.
And guys like Sam Harris got really frustrated with him because he was using psychology and philosophy. And they just did not have answers for those disciplines. They were used to just saying, well, science shows me that I can't find your spaghetti monster in the sky, and so therefore it just doesn't exist. And Peterson was challenging him on a fundamentally different level. No, I'm not talking about like the truth of measurable particles in the air. I'm talking about a transcendent truth that we all connect to. And when you start using that language, guys like Sam Harris just don't have they do not have the ability to follow, so they just discount the entire premise, the entire integrity of the discipline, right? Because they had an easy time saying, well, Christianity isn't real because whatever religion. But when you have these respectable disciplines like psychology and philosophy, it's harder for them to just discard it. But at the same time, they can't play in those waters, so they just do their best to kind of move beyond that. Mm. And with Joel, he doesn't know political theory, and that's okay. He's a comedian, right? Like he shouldn't have to. But because he doesn't know about it and he wants to talk about it, he has to just discount the theory behind things because he doesn't understand it and isn't going to take the time to learn it. And so when you get to those issues, he just kind of starts talking about, well, just freedom and liberty and the Constitution, because he simply can't get into the deeper parts of those problems. So he hasn't thought about the American system and why it worked in that time and why the founders based it on the principles they did and why it was only meant for a specific people living in a specific way and was not meant for globe-spanning empires that need to control activities in the Middle East and, Southeast Asia and these things. There's just a wildly different set of skills and they don't transfer over. The Constitution is not some general formula for governance across all space and time. It's for specific people living a specific way.
Yeah.
And that is really tripping him up because he knows that at some level, but he wants to maintain America as he sees it now. He wants the Bill Clinton America. He wants America as kind of the post Cold War empire that dominates the world. And so he can't address impacts that might have on the Constitution, the way the form may not work, because that's America to him. That is the America he's looking to preserve.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's the basic question. You have to decide, are you, to use one of Machiavelli's examples in the discourses, like, are you Sparta or Rome? Right. And if you have to determine which one you are to be successful. So what people like Joel Berry are wanting to do is to take the Constitution of Sparta, written for Sparta, and apply it to Rome. And you're just not that anymore, right? You're not small. You're not maintaining like maximal exclusion. For this particular group of people, you have to recognize what you are and then adjust accordingly. And we have adjusted accordingly. Actually, it's just that people like Joel Berry are convinced that we really haven't, and that people like us who want to talk about more fundamental or root problems of political science in the current moment are, performing some kind of corruption. When actually we're talking about something that's been radically corrupted a long time ago and totally changed, and especially like the raw material has been changed. And so if you really, as I always say, I'm sure I've said it on the show many of times, like if you want to be like the founders, if you really admire those people, I admire them. I think they're great. Then you need to think like they do. And it's very evident if you read enough of the founders that they have this kind of intellectual openness we're talking about when it comes to political thought. And what they formulate and come up with is something that they've done the right thing. They've fitted as best they can a constitutional order to the condition of the people. They've read their Montesquieu and everyone else, and they've fitted their laws and their constitution to the people. But then you have to recognize, like when Jefferson talks about, he always gets dinged for it, of like, we should change the Constitution every generation. I think, when I read him on that, I think it's less aspirational and more, it's more of an observation of like, this does happen. If the people change frequently, you have to change the way they're. In fact, it's unfair. Just as I'm sure Joel Berry would recognize it's unfair, or I hope he would, to try to govern Afghanis with the American constitutional order, whatever that thing is. It's also unfair to govern the current Americans, whatever that is, with this 18th century formulation and approach. Things have that everything's been changed. We wish it hadn't, but it has, because your raw material has been radically changed. That's actually the largest issue. So talking about in these truisms, or talking about the words on the paper, just not getting to fundamental issues. People like Joel Berry don't want to recognize. They don't want to talk about the demographics or the heterogeneity in these things.
Yeah, I mean, Joel's been pretty specific about this. It doesn't really matter who's in the United States, because the document will tell them how to be an American.
Yeah.
Which is strange, because if this is a guy who fought in Afghanistan. He's a Marine. Yeah. He was in the global war on terror. And when he brought that up, and I pointed out, so firsthand that, the American Constitution is not self-evident to the Afghanis. And he's like, well, no, of course not. But for some reason, Joel believes once they show up on American soil, then it does become self-evident. Like they can, they touch the magic dirt, and all of a sudden they can see this thing. So there's been this half step, I guess, that mainstream conservatism has taken, where we all kind of retroactively recognize that the war in Afghanistan was a mistake, and this 1,000 democracies blooming of George Bush was foolish. In fact, most of the mainstream conservatives that totally supported that will now laugh at that idea openly and say, yes, how foolish that we ever believe that. But at the same time, they will say, but as soon as those people cross into America, then actually it does work. And then the document does tell them what to do, and then they do it because that's what it means to be an American. So there's this thing where they at least can admit that cultures are different outside of America. But we are still working on the idea of helping them understand that once those cultures arrive in America, they don't just magically read the document and then start doing the thing. It doesn't suddenly become evident to them. They don't get their magic America glasses that lets them properly understand the Constitution. For the most part, especially in large numbers, they just maintain the same culture they had when they came here.
See, this is the thing. The question is why haven't the lessons of the international boondoggles over the past 30 years and before transferred to domestic lessons, right? That would be ideal. I really don't like our foray into Afghanistan ending with people falling 10,000 feet out of the sky. That was awful. But I certainly don't want it to happen here, right? That would be even worse. And so why isn't it transferred? And it's hard to come up with, at least in my mind, maybe you have a good reason or a good explanation. I think people that have not accepted those lessons for the domestic front have been obviously, one, it's scary because they're going to have to convince them, they're going to have to see the kind of destruction that happened abroad happen here, which is a really bad way to learn a lesson. But I think part of the reason it's, there's this wall up as soon as you hit domestic soil, those lessons don't apply, is because they've been so thoroughly convinced of the liberal dogma that, there is no culture here. And the reason it doesn't work abroad is because they do have thick cultures, and we need to respect those, of course, and we shouldn't intrude upon them. But we don't have that here, because if to say that we did have it would be racist, would be bigoted, would be wrong. And we're not part of insofar as we have a culture here, it's that we're not those things. I can't come up with another explanation of what is, like, where this sort of intellectual gap is being produced, other than that they have accepted and imbibed the dogma that's designed for them to fail, and so therefore they can shut off those lessons from abroad from ever encroaching on domestic politics. But I don't know. Do you have an explanation for this?
Yeah, I think it really is that once they arrive here, the domestic stigma of racism then attaches, right? Like if they're living separate lives and they can't understand why America is better, well, that's because they're living in Afghanistan, where they don't have those principles. But once they're here and the principles are available to them, they'll follow them, because ultimately America is a propositional nation. It's a nation of principles. It's a nation of an idea, not of a people. And the problem is that if you actually have discussions about the Constitution being a representation of a specific way of life, of a specific people, then the question is, who are those people? Right. And that's the answer that the current conservative establishment does not want to answer, because they've kind of built their entire identity around avoiding the accusation of racism from the left. They still have, after everything. They can say they don't care. They can say it doesn't bother them at this point, but they do. It's everything about them. And they can't, they still believe that if there's any level of exclusion inside the country, it is inherently racist. By saying that there are simply groups that are not going to assimilate and not share your values, you are saying something that is purely evil, and that makes you a leftist because you agree with them about racial groups and all these things. It's interesting because as we're speaking, Chris Rufo and Jonathan Kieperman, who now have a new show on the Blaze, are currently getting a large amount of attacks because they've pointed out that Somalians are simply unassimilable as opposed to other groups that have come to the United States. And people on the left and right are up in arms about this. And, Kieperman is just like, look, guys, if you can't observe this from outer space and recognize this truth, then we're in a level of denial of reality that is the same as saying that male and female don't exist.
Absolutely.
But that is still a heresy for many conservatives. They are still terrified of being attacked in this way, and they will root out people on their own side who not hatefully, but just are saying, look, objectively, this is the case. I don't hate these people. I hold no hate in my heart towards these people, but they just can't come here. That is still something that's more or less off limits, even for a conservative movement that is pretending to be opposing mass immigration. That attitude, that understanding that different peoples are different and assimilate differently and live different ways, that's still a heresy for guys like Joel Berry. And so the Constitution being something that represents that reality is a problem.
Yeah. And you want to talk about self-evident things that would have been self-evident to the founders. It's this. Absolutely self-evident. I mean, you can't, especially when they're talking about, you can read John Dickinson or others when they're talking about inalienable rights. Actually, they're really actually mainly talking about British rights. He says this explicitly. So the high degree of particularity, no ambition for the world. You can find like that stuff as well. They'll be like, no one really knows what we're talking. Like no one can articulate what we're talking about with all these rights, because we just kind of all assume it. We know it because of our culture, and the world doesn't. And so we have to find a way to articulate this. And I'm pretty sure these things wouldn't be self-evident to anyone else. It's because we've been sort of cultured in it. I mean, and someone like Jefferson, I'm sure Joel Berry loves, is perhaps the greatest heretic in this way, would be totally unacceptable, as would Benjamin Franklin, who, if he, given his speeches around the Constitutional Convention and ratification, would show up today and say, we absolutely need a despot. There's just no other option. They would not govern this place the same way for all the reasons we're pointing out. But that is, it is shy. It's good to hear these things because it gets you out of the the certain bubbles that I end up in where these things all seem obvious, but most people are not accepting them. And I think it bodes very ill for us, especially if you can't, if you can't even do this on the right, however broadly we can define that, then we're in real trouble in this regard. We can't even do basic political theory.
Yeah, it's something that's got to change. And that's, like I said, that's why I hope, several people have offered us another debate platform so we can actually debate on these issues next time. And so I do hope that ends up being the case, because I feel like, while it was kind of obvious from just the small parts where we had that discussion, I think if we drill down, it will become even more obvious that this is just an insufficient way to frame things. You can't get politics done while approaching them in this way. You can't ignore history. You can't ignore context. You can't ignore theory. You can't ignore the realities of power and pretend to be a actual political actor. So I think that would become more evident if we had more time to interrogate it.
Yeah. Well, I hope that does happen. I think it'll be instructive and illuminating for everyone. On the, this is somewhat of a decent segue to what else we wanted to talk about. So we have this problem on the right, as you're pointing out via Keeperman and Lomez, saying, if we can accept that, like, the Somalians are like one of the easiest examples. If you can't accept that and observe that these things are not working and that they'll never work, then I'm not sure what we're supposed to do. So that's but as you point out, this is still heretical. In the institutional conservative world, you're simply not allowed to do this. Something else that has been, cause for angst in kind of I don't know if you'd call it a resurgence of conservatism, Inc., reasserting itself, already talking about 2028. Obviously, much of this is proxy war. But another issue that seems to be we're not allowed to handle rationally or talk about plainly, it must be sensationalized and emotional, is the question, from the neocon wing. It's not a question for them, but the question raised by them from the neocon wing is our relationship to Israel, right? So as part of, I would say at this point, the leading issue of foreign policy debate on the right. So I want to get into that a little bit as well. Very as briefly as you can, to bring people up to speed of kind of what the most recent iteration of this conflict is on the right with the Israel question.
So, there has been for a while a discontent, especially I think among younger conservatives and people on the right, with the current relationship we have with Israel. And that exists on several levels. There's those that simply would like us to be more clear about the nature of that relationship, to turn it into something that is very, we discuss this relationship as one that benefits the United States. We have a lot of talk in conservative politics, Nikki Haley saying that America needs Israel. Israel doesn't need America. We have people like Tammy Bruce saying America is the best country in the world except for Israel. You have guys like Mike Huckabee going out and meeting with Israeli spies, convicted Israeli spies, to help their political career in Israel. And it just seems like there's a lot of stuff that is not centered on helping America at the heart of this. You can't really make an affirmative case that these attitudes inside the American government are America first. And so a lot of people are saying, look, I'm fine with us having a relationship with Israel, but I would like it to be centered on the benefit for America. Make the case to me as to what Israel is doing for me, not, show this weird allegiance to a country that is not your own. I don't want members of my own government. I don't want my own government spokesperson saying Israel is the best country in the world. Like this is unhealthy behavior for any nation to be involved in. And then there are others, I think more like myself, who just say, look, this relationship is bad for our current sovereignty. It's very clear that Israel doesn't like the level of kind of restrictions we place on them and their ability to do their thing. And we don't really appreciate the level of restriction that seems to work its way into the United States. And I just want to go with kind of the George Washington foreign policy. I don't want there to be long-term entanglements with foreign nations. It creates all of the problems that Washington predicted. And once again, if we're going to return to the founders, let's actually return to the founders. Like, let's return to what they believed on our relationship with Israel, and not just Israel, but Ukraine and any other country, right? I don't want these long-term entangling alliances. And Israel is just one of many countries I don't want to be involved with sin. So let's just help both countries be more sovereign by pushing away and, kind of mutually disentangling ourselves from this relationship. And then there are legitimately, I think, a growing number of people who do just hate Israel and do blame Israel for everything. And so, unfortunately, the issue is that all three of those groups are kind of being treated the same by kind of the establishment right that wants to maintain the status quo with Israel. And we can go into the wider political machinations. As you pointed out, this is also tied very much to the resurgence of Con Inc., trying to come back and reestablish those institutions. But the fact that they can kind of mix and match all three of those positions together and portray them as one position is creating this, pro-Israel, anti-Israel binary inside the conservative coalition that is starting to tear it apart.
Yeah, no, I think that's an excellent summation of kind of where things are. One thing that this is fascinating to me. I mean, I'm not like a foreign policy wonk, but this one is fairly straightforward because it's basically talking about our domestic politics at this point. And one thing that's always fascinating to me is that the, let's say, the very pro-Israel side, so this is not these three kind of iterations of Israel critique on the right, but the very, what they're reacting against, even at this stage, that sort of establishment neocon side feels, from what I can tell, no pressure to better or more fully articulate their positions. And I'm not quite sure exactly why this is, but of course, then any of the three camps you're pointing out on the right that have critiques, all it does is fuel their sort of their suspicions, right? Of actually there is nothing to this relationship that's beneficial to us because they refuse to articulate it in non-ideological, non-theological terms. There's no realist kind of geopolitical take that's being offered by anyone that I've heard. It allows you to very easily reduce it all to like the, Ted Cruz on Tucker Carlson. That's just like he's citing, Genesis 17 and things. And so where does this stand at this point? I mean, is this an indication that the Con Inc. standard position pro-Israel to the death is still ascendant and is they have no need to up their propaganda game because they're so entrenched? Or is it actually the case that there's nothing there? There's no other resources for them to pull from, so they're just going to ride the same kind of horse they've always ridden because it's been effective in the past?
Yeah, I think there's a mixture of reasons here. So as you point out, previously they could just say, look, Bible says we support Israel, so we support Israel. And that's a really powerful position to be in, having just this trump card of theology saying, look, if you're a Christian, you support the current secular government of Israel run by Bibi Netanyahu because that's what the Bible tells you to do. And we're Christians, so that's what we do. And for a very long time, that was more or less sufficient on the right due to the fact that kind of a certain level of dispensational theology had been kind of blended into talk radio Republican kind of Sean Hannity style rhetoric. And so organically, this is what a lot of conservatives just believed, like they legitimately believed it. So there wasn't a need for any kind of real debate on the issue because the vast majority of people just accepted this as the case. Over time, both because I think a lot of people have moved away from that version of theology and it has become increasingly unpopular, especially with people under, I'd say, 40, but maybe even 50. Then you have this kind of generational divide where a lot of kind of older Republicans and institutional Republicans and Republican like talk radio listeners still hold to this and still believe this quite fervently, but all of their children and grandchildren do not. And so because that, kind of automatic answer has broken down, we've suddenly discovered that actually the proponents of the Israel position don't really have a lot of arguments, maybe because they just got lazy, because they've got to rely on this super powerful kind of trump card, or maybe because they never had them at all. But when they do attempt to make practical arguments for the relationship with Israel, and I've started to hear some people start to do that now, the answer is basically just always, they give us intelligence, which has several problems with it. First, most of the intelligence is only useful when we're fighting wars in the region that tend to benefit Israel in the first place. So we're just getting intelligence on our ability to kind of do things that help them, which, I get why that's beneficial for them. I'm not sure why not, how so much for me. Second, I'm very much with Machiavelli in that, anyone who wins under someone else's arms is not a sovereign.
Yeah.
And so if you are relying on Israeli intelligence to do your job, then you're not sovereign. I mean, we're sending these people $4 billion a year minimum. That's where it starts before we start replenishing their missiles or sending carrier groups over to, help them strike something, or sending B-2 bombers around. But just that $4 billion, I think, could probably help us afford a intelligence apparatus that could do this job. Mm-hmm. So if that's all we're ever getting, and that is literally the only thing anyone ever seems to claim when they're even bothering to make the geopolitical, realist benefit argument, then I think it's just wise for us to take that money and do it for ourselves. So the real issue ultimately is, while I think there are earnestly quite a few older GOP, stalwarts and voters that agree with the more neocon Israel position, the truth is that ultimately, while these people probably do care about Israel on some level, the political actors, what they're really looking at is their ability to return to power. Because when Trump came in, a large number of the kind of establishment neoconservative actors got pushed to the side. Not completely, obviously. We still know many examples of those that are still active. Lindsey Graham still gets an endorsement from Trump no matter what. But many of these people got pushed to the sidelines. They were uncomfortable. These guys always hated Trump. They always were worried about Trump taking over the party. It'll become a cult of personality for Trump. He's going to completely rewrite what the Republican Party is. And by the way, they were right about that. I mean, mm-hmm. Trump has rewritten the Republican Party. It is now very much one that is anti-war, pro-tariff, pro-policies to benefit the family, very radical on immigration compared to previous administrations. These are not positions that the neocons wanted. And above all, they certainly do not want to stop fighting wars abroad. And so the fact that Israel is a wedge that allows them to kind of beat up the people who have ascended to leadership that are not part of the neocon coalition, that seems to be the big thing. They want to discard J.D. Vance for a return to some kind of Ron DeSantis version of the Republican Party, something that'll be a little more Trumpy but still effectively neocon. That's kind of their solution. So they're trying to clear out all of the new people at Heritage and the Intercollegiate Studies Institute, and we'll get rid of figures like Tucker Carlson who are influential, make sure that Vance is gone. So the MAGA succession is broken and we can kind of return to the establishment. So there are layers and layers and layers inside of this, which is why I think it's so confusing, why so many people find this novel game. Why is this person I otherwise respect acting this particular way? Because the issue is there, but also below the issue are all of these issues of power, not principle, that we are not saying out loud, but are obviously playing out in this whole drama.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And, others have said so as well, described it similarly. I mean, Sean Davis has done well in this on X talking about it. And I think that this is important for people to recognize that this is the real issue, especially if there's, what I would say, someone who, really does love Israel in the way we've been describing. It's not actually good for you to be used for the proxy wars in this way. So you need to recognize what's actually happening. And I do think, I wanted to get your take on this as well. I mean, you've already alluded to it or mentioned it a bit. There's some debate too over the extent to which evangelical theology is actually played into shoring this position up. I think it's fairly heavy. I mean, for the reasons you described, not in a pure sort of dispensationalist form, but insofar as that theology was proliferated pretty broadly and has trickled down in, sort of more basic version into many things. And I say this, you were pointing out the age gap. I think this is true because people that I know who are otherwise reformed in their eschatology and don't view the continuity of the covenants differently than a dispensationalist would, still will maintain, if they're above 50, the dispensationalist inflected view of Israel for like no, logical sort of theological conclusion or reason. But basically just because this has been ingrained in them from multiple fronts. So even as the theology that should inform this opinion has changed, their political position has not changed. And I find this absolutely fascinating, but it does seem to be the case for people 50 and up.
And to be fair, I think there's two reasons this happens. One is that in many ways, people have conflated the pop American political position with their Christianity. Mm-hmm. I call this boomer eschatology, where just kind of American institutions and Christianity are the same thing. And so the American position on Israel is the Christian position on Israel, even if your underlying theology has shifted. That stays in place. The other reason I think, and this one is more legitimate, I'm sympathetic to it, but we do need to address it. There is a lot of anti-Jewish hate going around like now. Mm-hmm. And, I have my questions about Israel, but Israel is not the Jews and the Jews are not Israel, right? Mm-hmm. This is a secular contemporary government, which can be critiqued just like any other. I can disagree with Barack Obama and still love the American people. I can disagree with Vladimir Putin and still have, sympathy for Russian people living under his watch. Like we do this all of the time with every other country, except with Israel. However, there is legitimately a large amount of anti-Jewish hate going on right now. And people are understandably concerned. I get that. I'm concerned when people have anti-white hate and it goes unaddressed. And I'm concerned when people have anti-Jewish hate and it goes unaddressed. And so because people are legitimately concerned about the anti-Jewish hate, they just say, well, then I'm on the other side of whatever that is, right? It's so ugly. It's so gross. I don't want to be involved with whatever that is. So I'm on the other side of it. Again, totally understandable reaction, but not a great one. Because when you have that reactive style, you fall into it. And this is why I've said many times over, I think that kind of the Nick Fuentes version of the right needs the neocon version of the left the neocon version of the right and vice versa, right? Yeah. These two need each other because if the neocons aren't being as outrageous as they are with their like pro-Israel stances, then Nick Fuentes doesn't have a case.
Yeah.
And if Nick Fuentes isn't being as outrageous with his I love Hitler, I love Stalin, I love Mao, I love every genocidal dictator, then the neocons don't have a case. Mm-hmm. The one position we're not allowed to maintain is actually Jewish people are fine. There's no reason to hate them. They're just people like everyone else, but also we just like to disentangle ourselves from Israel.
Yeah.
That's the one position that is not allowed to kind of have its own hearing because you have to get stuck either in this Fuentes area or in this Joel Berry area and nothing in between.
Yeah. No, I think that's exactly right, that the relationship there is, at least at this stage, symbiotic, right? This is what it's turned into. And I think, again, no one seems to be trying to disentangle this. Everyone seems to really enjoy, actually, the adversarial relationship they have because it gives them a sense of righteous indignation. It's probably the thing that feeds the most. Recognition, right, is what it feeds the most. Both wings or both poles would become irrelevant if the position you're describing became ascendant and predominant. Right. So that can't be good for either side trying to, wield or acquire their own form of power and influence. Right. So, again, I think it's important for people to recognize that this is the play and this is what's going on. I would say that objectively, the neocon side has more power and more influence and is more entrenched. Right. That just has to be the case. At this point, institutional power, longevity, so the likelihood of continuing your reign in this way. But and they have the weapon that is, as we talked about earlier, like most effective in American politics, which is to say the other side hates people or is bigoted or ugly in their speech and these sorts of things. So I do think it's somewhat asymmetrical, but it is symbiotic in that they both need each other.
Yeah, again, I just think that that's absolutely correct. And this is, of course, poisonous. Again, this is exactly what Washington warned about in his farewell address, that when you have a favored nation, it will create these factions. It will incentivize foreign influence. People will line up on one side or the other, pro or against, and this will be their identity inside the nation. That anyone who raises up concerns of the actual American nation instead will be shouted down as a traitor because they don't adhere to one side or another of the of this particular nation and the way you should approach it. So this is just absolutely poisonous to our body politic for all the reasons our founders predicted. But sadly, because so much power is bound up in this divisive position, I don't see anyone walking away from it immediately. I think you're right that the neocons are still more powerful due to their general entrenchment inside the institutions of the Republican Party. And I say this as someone who is a proponent of elite theory, who believes very much that those in power and those running institutions get to dictate the majority of the way that we operate. However, I will say in this instance, I am ultimately doubtful that they can maintain that grasp on those institutions for the simple reason that they can't turn over a new generation of staff that disagrees with them. Interestingly, because this divide is so generational, there really isn't anyone under 40 that believes what they believe about Israel. And so you can't staff the institutions, you can't bring people in to operate the institutions and maintain your control of them, because everyone you'd bring in, every young person you'd bring in, as we learned from the young Republican group chat everyone lost their mind over, they don't hold to this. And so while again, I'm rarely, the people will rise up against the institutions and turn out the elite leadership here. I think you're now at the point where actually there is a forced circulation of elites for this very simple fact that you can't manufacture any more neocons. It's just such a dead end ideology that there's just no one left to carry it forward in the next generation.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good point. I mean, I would say the only thing that makes me doubt that is listening to, the sort of Kevin Roberts struggle session was a fair bit of the people, you can't see them in the video, but were standing up and sort of airing their grievances against him were under 50.
Sure.
So, maybe they have a little more time than simply the end of the boomers. But I do agree that the trajectory is away from that. So, the people who, ended up getting dogpiled themselves for just asking perfectly reasonable questions were like 20-year-olds. So I would say that, maybe there's 30 and 40-year-olds that are still, for all sorts of reasons, willing to carry the torch, but it's certainly not the 20-year-olds. Right. But that leaves us with, a couple decades here that you have to kind of wade through and get through. So I think it's important for people to recognize the dynamics in play. And I actually do think that, part of the complication here is that the position we're articulating, which I think is very sensible and reasonable, is the one actually that J.D. Vance represents. And that's in part why it's a problem for the neocons, because this could sort of thread the needle. But they're not really, they've begun to, but they're not able to attack J.D. Vance directly in the same way they can attack other, representatives or sort of vectors. And so this is why you see all of a sudden you can critique Tucker Carlson all you want. He's a big boy, can take care of himself. But this is why this all of a sudden, massive attacks on people that they think are either close to Vance or represent him or are, fans of his, got him into the vice presidency, so on and so forth, and are attaching them to, the more extreme Nick Fuentes position or whatever you want to call it, which I do think is somewhat of a misstep of those people to sort of lean into that and dig their heels in further. For this reason, but that does seem to be what it's about, is who the successor of the Trump movement is going to be. I mean, is there any doubt that that's what's happening?
No, not at all. And as you say, this is why it's spun out. It started. some of them are sniping advance, but for the most part, they're wise enough. Not everyone is as unhinged as Max Abrams.
Yes.
To just throw it out there. But they are using proxy attacks on people like Tucker Carlson, because once they go after Tucker, they can go after his son who works for Vance.
Yeah.
They're going after Tucker's brother. We really are struggle sessioning like every member of the family to denounce your father, in the name of the party, type stuff. And so, that's kind of the play here. But again, you're of course right that there are people under 50 that do buy into this stuff, but these tactics are just blowing up the support for everyone who isn't completely bought in.
Yeah.
There's increasingly very few people who are going to be on the fence and think, well, you guys going after every bit of this person's family, that's probably fine. That's the way we want to conduct ourselves. There's always the possibility that the neocons just are so powerful and so thorough in their purge that they can put this down. But honestly, I am very doubtful that they have it. It looks more like the thrashing of a wounded animal than it does the exercise of power from a group that is confident in its ability to maintain control.
Yeah, I agree with that. It does smack of desperation and sort of maybe very late recognition that actually, we're not going to pull through on this thing. But they can do significant amount of damage on their way out, which should be minimized to the extent possible. So would you say then that you're somewhat optimistic in this way that there will be proper corrections and that once, as you said, if this symbiotic relationship between both poles is true, then proper correction would not end up with either one being ascendant or predominant.
Yeah, I don't think there's any way that the Nick Fuentes understanding of Israeli relationship is going to ever be something that's mainstream or functional in the United States. And obviously the neocon one has been for a while, but I think it is certainly waning in power far too rapidly to maintain its grip. I think we will probably reach kind of the J.D. Vance equilibrium, no matter how hard both sides are fighting against that. But I don't think we can just sit around and call it inevitable. As you pointed out, there is still a number of people in positions of power that will try to force one or the other, mainly the neocon, but also the other side because it's useful for them. And so I do think I think we are for the foreseeable future going to continue to skirmish over this issue. Sadly, I don't think it's just going to melt away. And we can't just sit around being like, oh, well, eventually we'll just win on generational momentum. That's foolish as well. But I do think ultimately that is where we will land.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. I mean, Nick Fuentes needs Mark Levin, who has also just completely lost his mind. And I think that's evident to people, even people I've talked to that are, boomerish and really liked him, which is his total audience. And just, that version of sort of demonstrable insanity and just how you conduct yourself publicly is not going to be compelling to most people. And then you see people like, he's been in the news a ton lately, Nikki Haley's son, who, unless he's lying to everybody, according to interviews and stuff, he has no great interest in Nick Fuentes. He's not formative for him. He articulates his positions on his own and does not seem like a hateful person out to get any particular, ethnic group or something like this, but just has a very basic, what seems very basic at this point, America First kind of position that was, in one way or another, the direct or sort of outgrowth of the promise of like the MAGA movement, right? Like that's what it is. So I think someone like him represents more of probably where, rather than Rod Dreher coming out and saying like all the staffers on the Hill are Groypers, I think someone like Nikki Haley's son represents probably where most people are.
Right, and I think for Rod that would be a Groyper, right? For him, that's the same thing.
True. Yes, maybe it's not just that we should discount the stats themselves as being somewhat ridiculous, but maybe the understanding of the investigator also of what these things are. So
right, I think any as I pointed out, any articulation of an Israeli skeptical position is de facto being attached to a Groyper movement. which again that is in the interest of the neocons because they need the problem to be bigger than it is, right? They need all of these people to be egregious, to be evil, to be on the pale, because any substantive look at the Israeli relationship is going to yield at least, I think, a kind of a Vance level distancing from probably the more egregious parts of the American-Israeli relationship. And this is sacred to so many of these people. So I wouldn't call Roger a neocon, but I do think at least on the issue of Israel, he does hold pretty traditional Republican understandings. And so anything that deviates from that, even if it's just the Nikki Haley's sons, kind of actually we should just put Americans first, and of course we should end immigration, and of course Americans should benefit from American jobs, and of course we should only work with Israel if it's beneficial to us. That sounds like groypering to, I think, a certain generation.
Yeah, and of course, again, this benefits the groypers, right?
Right,
it's
exactly.
much easier to recruit when this binary is set up and say, and it's much easier.
I hear this all the time. Just come over. Just be one of us. You agree with us on some of this stuff, so just go the rest of the way with us because these people are never going to take you in.
Yeah,
hear that all the time from the groypers.
Yeah, and instilling that kind of despair and frustration is very good for them.
Yes.
Which the neocons don't seem to care about, but other people should recognize how this is functioning, so that the urgency of putting forth the reasonable position, we might say, somewhere in between that most people probably already hold is, it's necessitated in part by this. Otherwise, this is just going to continue to spiral and be, very contentious, which seems entirely unproductive to me. Right. The groypers are feeding off of what people, holding these and other positions, their frustration with the Republican Party and how entrenched it is. And, this, even if you listen to, he could be backfilling or lying, I don't know. But even if you listen to the Nick Fuentes interview, I mean, his own sort of genesis, as he describes it, is basically this, what we're reproducing now, which is ask sort of reasonable, maybe even timid questions about our relationship with Israel, and it pushes you further and further and further because of the reaction of the neocons into something else, right? So this is what. So actually, I'm just convinced the neocons, I guess, as we've already been saying, don't care about this at all because they actually like having this fringe to beat up on and to sort of rally people to their cause.
Right. As Tucker pointed out, and people can, believe this or not, but, he said, one of the reasons I want to talk to this guy is I want to talk to his audience and let him know that there are other options. You can question Israel in the way that I am without hating Jewish people as a group. And I think that these guys need to hear that because so far all they're hearing from Nick is that, the only way to address this is to take on all Jews as a group. And the fact that Nick has to sit there and kind of moderate that language because now his audience is hearing Tucker and his version, that could de-radicalize people. Now, you might say, well, that's disingenuous from him and he's just being a snake to lure in more people. And maybe that's true. But the question is, did you want to get rid of the extreme language or not? Did you want him to moderate or not? And I think the answer, as you're pointing out, is no. Actually, Nick Fuentes moderating is bad for the neocons. A reasonable Nick Fuentes is a problem.
Yeah, and him, they're not actually interested in him losing like audience share. They're not interested in actually deconverting people from this.
Right.
Because they know that anyone who's been willing to entertain Nick Fuentes is not going to. The end result is not them becoming a neocon. It's somewhere in the middle, just with in a less hateful, less more thoughtful and less sort of wild approach to the problems that they're identifying. And so that's not useful. And then you would lose this cudgel you can beat the rest of the right up with. So I mean, I think that's exactly what's happening, and everyone actually likes it the way it is. This is most effective for all of them. So this is bad. This is something that needs to be, hopefully it will become apparent to people as these things go on. And I do think, even if people go watch the Tucker interview, which was whatever, I thought it was actually fairly boring. at least the representation that's put out by people like Mark Levin and everyone else is they will see that that's just not accurate. You could have other critiques. That's totally fine. But this thing of like, Tucker's there to mainstream Nick Fuentes and coddle him. I mean, I saw a Nick Fuentes that was entirely deferential in an almost childlike way the entire time to anything Tucker was saying that was even moderate pushback, which was just not a strong look for his side.
Yeah, the way that people address that interview just kind of says it all. Again, I would have asked some more questions of Nick that had nothing to do with Israel. I think there are some important questions around his movement and the people inside and possible, sexual abuse questions. Maybe they're wrong, but they were worthy to be addressed. I would have asked about the way he had, attacked Erica Kirk, a grieving widow. These are questions I would have asked, but people who look at that interview and they say, well, Tucker just softballed everything to Nick and it was just him normalizing Nick. That's just obviously not true. Like he didn't scream at Nick Fuentes. If what you were looking for was Tucker Carlson just going in there and just being like, you're a dumb racist bigot. He did not do that. But again, how much of Nick's audience do you think it would have won over with that style? Like if you just want the catharsis of watching him trash him, then fine. But if Tucker's real stated goal is I want to go in, de-radicalize these people and show them that there's a way to oppose Israel, that doesn't mean, saying Hitler's cool and hating Jewish people as a group, then I have to go in there and present this argument in a way that is persuasive. And when you see Nick in pretty much every pushback he gets from Tucker being like, yeah, that's probably reasonable. Yeah, that's probably a good point. Yeah, I could have done that better. Then all his audience is seeing is Nick Fuentes being deferential to Tucker and taking on his advice. Now, does he mean it all? Will he do it all? Maybe not, probably not. But I mean, what other outcome did you really want other than if you just wanted him to try to nuke him from orbit for your entertainment?
Yeah, no, I think it's exactly right. It was basically Tucker's own explanation with, he talks to Nikki Haley about this, which is fine. I mean, you can choose to believe it or not. It doesn't really matter. But that, clearly it's not what people wanted out of it. And it's not as if Tucker would have been welcomed back into the open arms of the neocons at Heritage if he had done that. He's already committed too many offenses of his own, and he's not interested in that, very obviously. But if you actually want to address this problem, then something like that, approximating that, is the way to do it. I mean, I certainly would have asked him. I mean, I think the whole Groyper world is evidently extremely licentious and perverted. And, so on and so forth. It doesn't seem like a great place to be. So you could have asked about those things, and that's great. But the directionally, the Tucker approach seems to be what would be most effective if you're wanting to reach those people. But it also seems like you're not allowed to do that. In any case, where do you have any sort of predictions of where this is going from here, other than just neocons dying out? But in sort of the near or shorter term, what is actually going to happen with this, or what do you see happening over the next? I think the important timeline is like 3 years, because a lot of this is already about 2028.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I don't know. It's hard to gauge. I don't think the average person cares very much one way or another about Israel or this infighting in the party. They just want Trump to deport people and get inflation under control.
Yeah.
So when it comes to just raw electability, if JD Vance, can ride the coattails of an administration that is successful in those areas, I don't think anyone's going to elect or not elect JD Vance based on whether or not the internecine warfare inside the neocon factions and the America First factions is played out properly. That said, the Trump administration seems to be having some issues with both of those currently. Mm-hmm. So if JD Vance is a guy who's actually following a relatively weak administration that did not reach its goals, did not achieve these things, if we still have 50 million illegals in the United States and inflation is still going up and no one can buy a home, then I guess at that point the Republicans are in trouble in general, but JD Vance becomes much weaker because it'll just be like, well, Trumpism failed and we got all this anti-Semitism. So we'll discard this guy for something inside, the Beltway that's a little more comfortable for our donors. We'll get the money back. Maybe we can get some more ads out and raise some more money, and we'll win the next election cycle. I don't see that being a particularly persuasive argument. But again, if ultimately the populist revolution does not yield results, people will just kind of take whatever comes next. So I think that while this issue will continue to probably divide the elite kind of, I guess I hate to say this out loud because it's so dumb, the influencer space. But if that continue, I think that'll probably continue to rage for a while, and therefore will spill into the voter base. I mean, when I speak to normal people who are not plugged in at all, they have their own issues with Israel, even on the right side, if they're under 40. Mm-hmm. So I think that will probably continue, but I don't think it will be the driving issue of anything, even a Republican primary. I think mm-hmm. what will determine that ultimately was the Trump legacy one of success? Is that something J.D. Vance can attach himself to successfully?
Yeah. I mean, I agree with that myself, even in terms of assessment. I'm certainly not voting. I'm not a single issue voter for like Israel policy. If you promised me you could, if you guaranteed that there would be, 50 million people deported and the inflation would go down, I would vote for that. So I think regular people, right, regardless of what the Israel posture is, these are just more direct and kind of pressing concerns. So I think that's perfectly a reasonable way for people to vote. And I agree with you. That's how it will largely go. So this is, in many ways, not that there won't be eventual trickle down or hasn't been already, but in many ways, what we've seen unfold really is just a battle over the sort of intellectual leadership of the party and its institutions. I don't think it'll have great electoral impact at this stage. Maybe in the future it would, but I don't think so. In any case, that doesn't mean it's not important. I think it does matter. But Auron, thank you so much for talking to me about it and offering your insights and your thoughts. Always much appreciated and beneficial for us and our audience. People probably already know, but tell them where they can find you and follow your work over at The Blaze and on Twitter and so forth.
Oh, sure. Once again, thanks for having me. And if you want to find my show, I'm on Blaze TV. We're on YouTube, Rumble, Odyssey, all the podcast platforms that you would expect. And of course, I'm posting on Twitter. Sorry, it's never X. Everything's under Auron MacIntyre, the Auron MacIntyre Show.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And audience, thank you as always for tuning in. Do subscribe so you don't miss our episodes with people like Auron. And until next time, God bless.
You can find American Reformer on the internet at www.americanreformer.org or on x.com, formerly Twitter, at @AMReformer. Don't forget to like, rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast. Please consider supporting us today by making a tax-deductible donation through our secure online donation portal at AmericanReformer.org. That's AmericanReformer.org.